I'm Adam Isaacs, an AI-generated spokesperson. Me talking to a group of regulators is simple. Individuals using AI to make their picks for sporting events and esports? Well, that might require some examination by regulators. To talk us through it, please welcome your real-life moderator, GLI's Senior Executive of Government Affairs, Gabe Benedik, and panelists, Chief Content Officer, Senior Betting Analyst, and on-air talent at OnlyPlayers.com, Doug Kezirian, Managing Director of ProhiBet, Matt Heap, professional sports bettor and co-founder of Unabated Sports, Rufus Peabody, and co-founding partner of VC fund Acies Investments, Chris Grove.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we finally made it to the final session here today. Appreciate everyone's patience, and I see everyone's kind of trickling in still. So just to get things started, this panel discussion is going to examine the concerns of AI-driven sports betting. We're going to dive headfirst into the wild west of AI-driven sports betting. So it's like putting your favorite team's fate in the hands of a supercharged robot with a knack for stats and a love for the game. But hey, with great power comes, well, maybe some concerns. Today we're not just going to peel back the curtain on AI sports betting. We're also shining a spotlight on the fears, the doubts, and yes, even the occasional sleepless nights that you regulators in attendance have. So buckle up, folks, because we're about to dissect the good, the bad, and the I'm not so sure how I feel about AI-driven sports betting. And you see my little examples of what that exactly entails. We see it all the time. Not really sure we understand it. So before I get into the Q&A, because I want to jump in because we've got such an esteemed panel here, I'm going to let each one of these gentlemen introduce themselves and kind of give the little background so you know why they're esteemed colleagues in this industry. And we'll start with you, Doug.
Thank you. As the intro video or AI moderator introduced, my name is Doug Kezirian. I am currently at Only Players, which is a new sports betting production content company. Prior to that, I was at ESPN for 11 years doing basically content, and that's been my whole career in the broadcasting space, which before ESPN was in Las Vegas. So anybody who knows Las Vegas knows that the professional sports teams are relatively new. And prior to that, betting was the focal point of a lot of sports coverage, and that was where I sort of cut my teeth in the betting space 20 years ago and have stayed plugged in on content side, but also handicapping side, betting side. And that is sort of like the arm of that panel that I will be representing, probably the best way to put it.
And I unfortunately get to follow that voice. That's obviously made for TV. So Matt Heap, recovering regulator after 30 years, most recently retired in June of 2022 from the Colorado Division of Gaming, where I was the chief of investigations and instrumental in our team starting up sports betting. Have now had a stint 10 months after that, 10 months with GeoComply, and then now managing director of ProhiBet, which is a joint venture between a recently merged company that we just did a press release yesterday called IC360, where we focus on compliance products for the gaming industry worldwide, and overseeing a prohibited sports bettor technological solution to try and help you all enforce and maintain compliance with folks that shouldn't be betting in certain markets and certain spaces.
I'm Rufus Peabody. I'm a professional sports bettor, which I've done for the last 15 years. I'm also the co-host of the Bet the Process podcast with Jeff Ma, who I think you all saw earlier today. And I'm the co-founder of Unabated Sports, which provides tools to help bettors be smarter. Before that, I did a stint at ESPN as their predictive analytics expert. And I got my start in this industry as an odds maker, or working for odds makers, Las Vegas sports consultants, in my first year out of college. I kind of accidentally in this industry. I did my senior on psychological inefficiencies in the baseball betting market in college, and was, I never thought you could make a career out of sports betting, but I kind of just happened into it, and so I think I'll have the perspective of the sports bettor.
Hi, I'm Chris Grove. I'm jealous of Doug's voice, Matt's watch, and Rufus's socks. That's my jealousy power rankings. I've had the pleasure of working with a few of you in my role at Eilers and Kraycheck Gaming, where I founded the sports betting and online gambling practice. Currently, I'm a co-founding partner at Acies Investments, a venture fund that I founded with Jim Murrin. He used to be the chairman and CEO of MGM Resorts, that's focused on making investments in startups in the gaming and gambling industry.
All right, folks, let's jump right into things. And this first question will be for three of you, Doug, Rufus, and Chris. Do you guys believe that the use of AI in sports gambling is a paradigm shift, transforming it from a game of luck to disciplined practice where data, analysis, and strategy play key roles?
I'm happy to start there. I think it certainly can be that, right? I don't think that it means it will be inevitable for everyone. We have to remember people engage with all kinds of gambling products for all kinds of different reasons. Some consumers want escape, some want entertainment, some want to enhance their sports viewing experience, and others are very interested in the analysis and the process, if you will. Certainly for those that take more of a data-driven approach, certainly for those that want to unpack the activity, the technological advances we're seeing today offer more tools to go deeper and to make it a more analytical exercise. They also offer more tools for the bookmakers on the other side. So I do think it's important to understand when we talk about these technologies, that we're talking about a range of technologies. I think we sometimes use AI as this blanket term, while everyone in this room may have a slightly different definition of what actually sits under that blanket. But B, we also have to remember that it will not be interacted with equally by every consumer or even every operator. So that to me is the playing field as it stands today.
Rufus.
Well, I think no, the answer I think is no. I don't think it transforms it. I think sports betting has always been a game of skill for some people. Mm-hmm. You're trying to get an advantage in whether that's data, information of different sorts, and now there are a lot more tools and at one's disposal for books and for bettors, and so it's the same game. It's just it's actually more difficult because now everybody has all these tools and data, and so it actually makes it a lot tougher to win.
I'll recycle some of the conversation we had and steal some of the lines we had from our previous, we were in chatting ahead of time. I think it just depends, and you guys alluded to it, just how you define AI and where we are. I mean, is it Y2K stage where we're kind of fearing it and it hasn't really arrived yet? Or is it here, meaning in the specific handicapping / betting space / odds making space? I personally don't think AI will have a huge impact on the odds making process and things along those lines any more than current modeling and computers and all that stuff do right now. But that's, I'm not behind the counter. I'm not running the company. I'm just seeing it from my lens, but obviously I have reach in that regard. But I think there's a limitation to the impact it can have on this specific lane of the space.
Okay. Rufus, being the pro sports bettor, I've got an interesting question to ask you. And do you believe that the integration of artificial intelligence into sports gambling will ultimately enhance the overall experience for bettors?
I think it can, and it has. If I log into DraftKings app and they know that I bet golf, and suddenly that's front and center, I don't have to go search in the menu for that. That is useful to me. The fact that I can only bet $13.75, that is less useful. So I think this is a very, very large question. I think there's definitely a lot of areas that it can be useful, but I do think we have to worry about the potential for promoting predatory products and responsible gambling stuff. I think that is a huge issue. If you win a bet, suddenly, do you want to play blackjack, right? And so I think that's something that regulators, you guys are going to have to grapple with and figure out where that line is.
And I'm actually straight on the fence on this topic, the predatory concept, because I obviously understand the pitfalls and the dangers and the predatory nature of it. But don't we in a lot of ways have that exist in all the other spaces in our world, right? I mean, we have in these casinos, like there's no windows, there's no clocks, there's ugly rugs, but even outside of the betting space, there are signs that are supposed to catch your attention in advertising and things like that. And why should one lane be restricted on what they can do when people should be able to operate as an adult or something like that?
Well, Doug, there's certain products that do not advertise on TV, for example, or they can't advertise in certain ways. And I remember growing up, we didn't have like hard alcohol advertising on TV. I think it does now. Maybe it depends on what state you're in. But right now, I think we all probably can agree that I think the advertising for sports books right now has kind of gone overboard, and we're all inundated with this. And
but
I don't think that's
totally on the fence. So I understand all those points, but like my understanding is, and this is different than how I believe you bet and how I bet is, but like 85% of some of their wagers that come in are like $5 or less, and they're really like just long shot sort of
game parlays.
Yeah, same game parlays that evening, the equivalent of having a couple brewskis watching a game. Dropping the $5, $7, whatever it is, maybe doubleheader, whatever, and just sort of enhancing the viewing experience that we were talking about earlier. So why should the line be drawn for that if that's the pitfall of it? Now we both know that there's extremes of everything. There's shopaholics. There's anything in super excess is bad in theory, right? So like, should fast food joints not be able to push certain food because of the ingredients?
That's a good question. I do think, though, that these $5 bettors are not the ones that DraftKings, FanDuel, et cetera, really care about. Like, this is awful to say, but they want the people that have gambling problems. They want the big whales that are betting way too much money, because that's how they make money. And I think we have to remember that there's always going to be this incentive problem.
My understanding is they do want the $5 bids. That again, but I'm not on that side of the counter, so I can't speak with any credibility on that.
All of this, I think, speaks to, and maybe we'll get to this topic a little bit further down the scroll, but we don't know what we don't know, and so there does have to be this layer on the regulatory level, and I suspect Matt will talk about this at greater depth, where we at least have to build a structure that allows regulators to understand how operators are proposing to use this technology. Right? So that there is at least some transparency around the topic of how are you modeling CRMs to approach players? How are you using data to drive player-specific incentives? That to me feels like the first level of this conversation, because until then, we do have a little bit of a speculative exercise of, okay, who are the customers that are being targeted? Why are they being targeted? What are the economics of that? So without that structure of allowing or compelling operators to start to articulate how they're utilizing these technologies, and for the regulators then to have a way to ingest and process that, I think it gets hard to actually get down to real policy conversations.
Oh, exactly. And I was going to kind of pose this at Matt, or pick on Matt, because Matt being a former regulator that's sitting here on the panel, and I was going to ask you, Matt, are you concerned with ethical implications of AI-powered betting? Transparency, responsible gaming, data privacy. There's a lot of things that are in this mix. What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I don't know if concerned is necessarily the word, but I think it's something that we all out there, and I'm going to speak from my regulator voice because it's recent, and that's the crowd that we're trying to help here educate. I think there certainly are things that we do need to pay attention to on the ethical aspect of things and all of that, and Chris touched on it. We had the great first session here that kind of gave us that initial thing that I think we all need as regulators, is the education component of what exactly are we talking about and what is this doing in the space that we are trying to regulate and ensure consumer confidence, consumer protection, trust in the product that they're gambling on in the regulated space. And so for the transparency piece, by all means, I think that the consumer has the right and should be delivered in some form or fashion, whether it's disclaimers or whatever else, through the regulatory bodies, so that the bettors are aware of these components that are being utilized to help set lines and the data collection and the other pieces. Of all three of those things, including the data privacy is a huge piece, and now working for a company that does every single aspect of what we do has to do with data collection and data privacy and personal identifying information and ensuring that there's AI components built into that to encrypt it so it can't be reverse engineered. Those things are critically important, but to me, and we've heard it all day long, the responsible gaming piece of this is the most critical component that I think as regulatory bodies and jurisdictions we have to have our hands on. And where it certainly is creating efficiencies, the AI component of this, and it's tailor-making betting experiences that are meant to be entertainment. But when does that get to the point where we may be starting to see people have tendencies that it's turning into a problem? And so the responsible gaming component that I think has been woefully overlooked in all of this, as we've all adopted our different regulations and our different start points in the sports betting space, those certainly are things that we need to become better versed in so that we know how to go about really wrapping our hands around it.
And I actually parlay that question, no pun intended, but do regulators have the necessary tools and resources to detect irregularities and suspicious activities as they may arise from the use of AI in sports betting? And there's different scenarios, we talked about earlier, in the live betting, in-game bets and that kind of stuff. What's your thoughts on that?
I think that the tools exist. I would venture a guess, knowing the restrictions and the roadblocks and the bureaucracy that all of you go through, that I went through when I was doing what you all are currently tasked with doing. You don't actually have access to everything that you need to try and help get you to the point where you are the experts that can educate the patrons and help with consumer protection. And I think that's kind of the ground level foundation that needs to be created, which is why today is such a great set of sessions, is helping build the education level of all of us in this room, so that we know what tools are out there and finding other means to obtain that technology. But I would say that I'm sure that many jurisdictions, we know that we lack resources, money, the ability to get our hands on things to try and maintain how quickly that this industry adapts. So I would say that there's a good chance that there is not in the possession of a lot of you all the necessary tools to try and get you to that level. But I do think that attending events like this, and I'm very grateful and honored to be up here presenting, but the GLI has focused on that as one of the main components of this year's conference, is providing that base level education that I know probably next thing that needs to happen is getting the proper stakeholders together from everywhere, people on the stage like all of us, problem gambling representatives, you name it, that you can start looking at what are the best practices, understanding what this is actually doing to the industry before you start going off making haphazard regulations on things that just don't make sense across the board.
Well, I think what Chris was saying is we don't know what we don't know. I mean, well, first of all, one end of the spectrum is what they're doing now, which is bare minimum, right, to satisfy some requirements. An 800 number in the upper right hand of the corner of the screen, maybe a pop-up that says you've done X, more than your whatever, and then people click OK. And then it's the other end where it's like, how much is their responsibility, that I was sort of talking with Rufus about. And if the leagues are greasing the wheels on this and everyone's sort of all in, and there's a competitive race for customer acquisition, if one company's not doing it, why should we do it? I could imagine those conversations are occurring. Why is it on us if someone's this sort of self-destructive? They're going to find their way to be self-destructive even if it's not us. So. But it also goes back to how it's circumstantial and new territory. I don't know if it's the best parallel, but right after 9/11, all of us flying had to get in there hours early and go through check-in. And I remember we did stories, and there was a lot of stories just how much money travelers were having to spend at the actual terminal because they were there so early. And this was prior to, we had cell phones then, but it was like not quite the same toys we have now with iPads and podcasts and everything. And so were the airports predatory then? Because what else is there to do other than, you just drink and eat and stuff? And was there price gouging and everything like that? And it was new territory there, and I think it's new territory now. I mean, should there be display ads explaining this is a bad bet because our straddle is 30 cents or 40 cents in-game, and your whole percentage is X, and this is so I understand both sides. I mean, just in my own venture, I'm trying to educate and explain stuff and just demonstrate how to go about being a winning sports bettor and not fall victim to some of the stuff. But there are other people who do take it, so I'm just showing one way. But I do think there could be a lot more done. I just don't know if the regulators know. It's not even the regulators, the states know how to implement it and govern because they're not really familiar with the material. And they had sort of a reckless approach of getting stuff licensed and banning a certain, like Illinois, in the state of Illinois, like you can't bet on Illinois sports. And just sort of they were so fixated on things that shouldn't have mattered rather than some of the big picture stuff, because I don't think they knew what they were doing in that regard, and then therefore the protocol and punishment or protocol and rules weren't in place.
Well, now we're having some of the banning of college player props in some of these states, which, I mean, I don't know if I have a lot to say on that, but maybe another time.
Well, I'll transition and I'll put Chris on the spotlight with. I'll put you in charge of speaking on behalf of the leagues.
Great. What could go wrong?
But are the sports leagues actively collaborating with sports betting operators and these AI providers to create more seamless, integrated sports betting experiences?
Yeah, I would say no on the actively collaborating, right? There are some naturally aligned incentives that lead them to collaborate, but in terms of sitting in a room with an AI genius, I won't pick a sports betting executive, and then a league commissioner, and all saying, how can we put this together to create the most diabolically compelling product ever? That's not happening. But sports leagues have long known that more betting tends to correlate with greater engagement. It's not linear. There are diminishing returns that kick in at some point. And certainly, to your point, more personalization just resonates with consumers. You serve consumers in any app you pick up your phone and open right now that's a commercial app. There's probably some level of personalization based on your past orders, based on your implied preferences, et cetera. So we just have this macro that this works. So I don't think there's active collaboration. I will tell you, I do work with a company called Arctos Sports Partners. They're a PE fund that owns minority stakes in like 22, 23 professional sports teams, something like that. And so I've had the opportunity to see inside of the boardroom at some of these companies. And for them, AI at this point is primarily, all right, how can we get a little bit more efficiency on customer service, right? How can we have a better online chat experience and make sure people are being routed to where they need to be routed? How can we take these reams of data that we have and get a little bit more value out? For them right now, it's more just utilizing AI, if we want to call it that, to make sense of the reams of data that they have and to implement like marginal efficiencies in the consumer experience, as opposed to saying, we've got a vision for transforming the world. It starts with AI and we're rolling it out in September.
Sure, and just to kind of continue on with the leagues, they use AI. Mm-hmm. We see it all the time, right? We watch an NFL game now, and you could go on Amazon and watch the data game rather than the actual game itself. So you could see the real-time numbers of speed and how long the throw is, and you could see the plays develop, what kind of play is being called. So ultimately, as I watch this, is the intention behind that for, is it a fan experience? Is it enhancing the fan experience? Or is it other strategic purposes, or is it kind of like a mesh, because bettors are looking at this and some of the operators are saying, we're going to create over-unders based off of, speed and these kind of things as they look to expand, right? Different proposition bets and things like that as the industry grows and looks for new avenues to create these sources. So is it like a combination that we're seeing, the focus on AI in all, and I'm picking on the NFL, but we see it in Major League Baseball, the home runs are measured. So what is again, I'm going to put you on the spotlight and let you speak on behalf of the leagues.
It's a simple answer. The leagues, as far as I understand it, the conversations I have, and others may have differing viewpoints, they view data as IP in the same way that they view the game as IP. And so where do leagues make the majority of their money? It's from leveraging their IP, right? Broadcast deals, streaming deals, et cetera. So for them, this is a more medium to long-term play around we've got another source of what we think could be valuable IP. Maybe sports books want it, maybe media companies want it. We don't know. But what we know is this is something else we can slice up and sell. So let's start collecting it. Let's start cleaning it. Let's make it as sophisticated and as robust as possible. And honestly, people are going to come to us to figure out how to commercialize it. That's not really what the NFL is interested in doing. They're just going to say, we've got some of the most valuable IP on the planet. Here's another subsection of that IP. Come to us, tell us what you want to do, and tell us how big of a check you're going to write. And betting is part of that, but it is far from the only commercial opportunity for that data.
Okay. Doug and Rufus, we'll transition a little bit. And we'll actually talk about the betting. And do you believe, we'll start with you, Doug. Do you believe that the human expertise in odds making still holds significant value, or is artificial intelligence, AI, increasingly surpassing in terms of accuracy and predictive capabilities?
So I talked to a couple odds makers because I was very, you and I spoke about a month ago, and I was pretty green in this area, and I was very curious to hear how the panel would, what my colleagues would have to say. I think their reaction is we'll see, and we'll cross the bridge when we get to it, but they are using tech to the human element. That's obvious, right? They have data, whatever you want to call it, resources to help them sort of profile and use information from that and glean that to massage the numbers accordingly. That's my understanding of how traders are approaching this and odds makers. The market will have the invisible hand component too, but there's definitely going to be a human element to this, and that's where things go. My take was like the AI was more about targeting, kind of like what Rufus was alluding to, opens his app, things like that, and the predatory concept. But in terms of the actual odds making, I'm not sure. I'll believe it when I see it. I'm not going to be completely myopic, but I'll have to see it to believe it.
I agree with Doug there. I think that, and I'm approaching from the betting side. First off, the odds making side doesn't really matter as much. It's more of the trading at this point. Because you can.
I use them interchangeable.
Yeah. But
because there's so few originators who people think are odds makers. The traders are the odds makers.
You have B2Bs basically that are the odds makers. Swish Analytics or whatever that are providing the SGP pricing, et cetera.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yes.
So if one of these companies is doing this strictly based on machine learning, like unsupervised machine learning, there's going to be a lot of opportunities. Years ago, I tried to hire someone, and when I try to hire someone, I want to see how they can actually do the job they would be doing. So I gave this person a task to build a simple NBA win probability model, just using the pregame expectation, how much time was remaining, and who had the ball. And this person, very, very smart person, shows me output from this model that shows that an NBA team up 7 with 45 seconds left has less of a chance of winning than a team up 6 points with 45 seconds to go, right? And so I think there is domain knowledge that has to be put in there and logic imposed. And so if someone says, we've solved sports betting, the data takes care of all of it, that's wrong. A lot of it is a small data problem too, because sports are changing. College basketball this past year, they introduced a new rule change where basically it made there'd be fewer offensive fouls, fewer charges. I guess the defensive player had to be in position before the offensive player took a last step. And so you have to try to figure out how that's going to actually impact total number of points scored in basketball games. And you don't have a lot of data on it, and you kind of have to think creatively. And I think honestly that's where the advantage comes as a bettor. The fact that I don't have a lot of data, but I have a good process. And so there are lots of areas where you can fit machine learning and AI type things within your process, but I think you need to have that process and it needs to be logical.
Yeah, I think the last part is the most specific, is that sports are changing, and something that may not even have been covered or mentioned, but maybe it is, it's just the models can't catch up, or the algorithms can't catch up, the end game and things like that. There's going to be, like, mid-season, the NBA changed the officiating and how to make it fewer fouls and more of a tighter game, so a lot less scoring and fewer free throws, things like that. Just take, for example, the new kickoff next year for the NFL. The current, what's going on with the XFL and the UFL merge, like these leagues with the completing a 4th and 12 pass for an onside kick. These things all affect betting, and pretty significantly. Just the increase in three-point shooting in the NBA the last 5 to 7 years has drastically changed everything. And yeah, the odds makers think like it takes about a week or so, but the NFL the last couple years with red zone offense, there was a bunch of unders this year, the first half of the NFL season, there's always going to be they're really copycat leagues. That's like a term that's thrown around, but there's a lot of copying, whether it be scheming or drafting. When Patrick Mahomes started winning Super Bowls, Trey Lance all of a sudden shot up the draft board and goes obscenely high with no track record at a Division I school. So there's all sorts of things that change it, and if you are familiar and understand the nuances of the market and the algorithms and the betting and also the sports, you can find opportunities. And I just don't think odds makers are doing that from a hand odds making situation.
They're being reactionary, I think.
Yeah.
And the edges come in looking at things, looking at really granular data and sort of building something bottoms up. At least this is how I approach it, to essentially be able to identify this change before it actually happened, before I have enough data to actually say, this is what, this rule change has increased scoring by 3 points.
They've never had to. Let's take a step back. Most people who are odds makers are veterans, right? They're not like fresh out of college.
Are you talking about traders or?
Traders, odds makers, all of them, even sportsbook directors and things like that. For so long, they got by with just sort of following the market. And then they had a built-in hold percentage, whether it be in a futures market or just the juice and the VIG, the transaction cost of a point spread. And that always protected them. But there are opportunities where you can offset that.
I don't think it really matters. Any of this really matters for odds makers, just because if you're doing your job right, you're trading off of people's bets. You're engaging in the process of price discovery. And the problem right now is in the United States, there are very few books that are actually doing that. A book like Circa is, and they've been very successful doing that. But you have other books that are free riding off of the price discovery that some of these operators are doing, some of them offshore. And the reason, I know we all, I know that offshore books are not viewed with, friendly eyes in the United States, but I think
exchange more so.
Yeah, it's a different business model, but what you have is a situation where U.S. retail books are hanging prices and taking bets, thinking that the price discovery done by these other books has been good, whereas in reality, I could personally, and have this year, spent $2,000 betting a game the wrong way at some of these market-making books that are engaging in price discovery, and then been able to bet $35,000 on the other side after the total moved up 2 points in the wrong direction. So I think it's less about actually modeling the sport, and it's more about actually understanding what the price should be and having confidence in sort of that window.
Look, I think from the regulatory perspective, I think more about where the trend line is heading versus what we can do today. And I don't personally have much doubt that the trend line is heading in the direction of more and more and more automation. Maybe that actually is suboptimal ultimately, but that's where the trend line seems to be going, and that's what, from a regulatory perspective, from a policy perspective, that's the world we need to prepare for, right? Sure. Again, whether or not economically it's the best, or whether or not it takes a year or 3 years or whatever the case may be, this is the direction that the industry broadly is going in, especially the industry that everyone in this room is charged with regulating.
Sure, and just to kind of change gears a little bit, because this is so broad, this subject, this topic. What's also important, and Matt, I'll pose this to you again. You could put your former regulator hat on. As this develops, how can regulators collaborate, with sports leagues, gambling operators to establish guidelines and standards that would promote fair play, responsible use of, the intelligence in sports betting? And you can start off here, and I know, Chris wanted to add some stuff to this, but
first, I want to know, what does the regulator hat look like? Are we talking about, is that more of a fedora thing or a baseball cap, or how do you imagine it in your head when you're putting on the regulator hat?
Not very expensive, right? And it's probably doesn't have a lot of style to it, but we get it in mass produced, so cheaper, low contract. But, I think the word in your question, Gabe, is the collaborate. That's exactly what it has to be. I know when we were promulgating rules with the Colorado board back in 2019 and trying to work through how we're going to set up this regulatory framework for sports betting, none of this was contemplated. I mean, there may be bits and pieces of this in different parts of the security protocols and the things that you need to do and certifications, but AI was not even a concept that was being brought up when we discussed how do you regulate this and what do we need to look out for on behalf of the consumer, because that's really what we're doing, is consumer protection from our side of the view, and responsibility. And I think you have to do just exactly what that question poses is actually the answer. You bring that group together, which I think many in this room probably did when they did their promulgation of their sports betting rules, was bringing together a varied group of perspectives that, quite frankly, didn't agree all the time, but you came to common sense rules at the end of the day. I think that's exactly what has to happen here. But before that can even happen, we as an industry of regulators have to really get better educated. And I think probably during the course of today, we've gone a lot further than I think I know personally that I was at. But I would imagine that everybody in this room probably learned quite a bit today of the things that we probably need to look out for from that side of the table, so that you can truly create some reasonable, something that operators can actually comply with. I mean, and the whole education piece, that has to be paramount. I mean, I was always of the belief that, there's the three components of a good regulatory oversight scheme, and it's education, compliance, and then enforcement if you had to. And it doesn't matter what the industry or the product is, and this particular topic is no different. I've had conversations in the last 2 days with different people about knowing this question was sitting out there, and I truly think best practices, whether it's GLI 27 that it gets opened up and looked at, because so many other of the states here have utilized those regulations in some of their security protocols, and how you build that into your framework. That's what has to happen, I think, first, before anybody sits down and drafts up regulations that maybe are a little bit off track. If we don't know what we're really dealing with and what's necessary, and not going overboard to restrict the industry, because we certainly don't want to do that. There's no good in that. I think that's the starting point, and that's how you get to probably good uniform rules across the board that kind of meet the need for this as it continues to evolve.
I want to double click on, sorry, go Rufus.
I was just going to say really quickly that I would urge regulators and legislatures, I guess, in drafting regulations, to actually listen to the perspective of bettors. I feel like that has been one thing that's been really, really missing in the rollout so far. It's sports leagues, it's operators. There's not really a voice for bettors and the consumers, and so I just wanted to leave you with that.
When I say comprehensive, that's what I'm talking about too.
Yeah,
that's a voice in the room.
And actually, earlier this morning, Jeff brought that up in the keynote about having a voice for sports bettors when you are, promulgating rules or making maybe even changes, amendments to it, is bringing them in the conversation, because again, it's for entertainment, right? This is supposed to be the end product. You don't want to, stipend, right? You don't want to cut off the opportunity to be entertained. So I think that's it was a good point that you just made, Rufus, but it was also, Jeff brought up that same thing. And now I know why you guys work together on the podcast and stuff. You think very similar.
On the education piece, how many people here have been working in the industry for 10 years or more? Okay, me too. I probably should raise both hands, right? 20 years or more. So that means you come from an era where there was no such thing really as a startup for gambling. Right? Never would have started a venture fund focused on gambling in 2014. Wouldn't have made any sense. Post-PASPA, all of a sudden you did get a lot of folks who weren't that interested in our industry before sports betting, who might have founded a healthcare or a fintech or some other kind of startup. So now I want to look at sports betting. So when we think about education, to Rufus's point, there is this opportunity to broaden the lens to include the voice of the consumer. They're easier to find, easier to understand what kind of consumer they are. You don't have to just draw from that same playbook of how do I get educated about a topic? Well, I bring in the usual suspects. I bring in my operators, I bring in my suppliers, I bring in my RG advocates, and my other 3 or 4, right, stakeholders that I tend to bring into these education processes. You can bring in consumers, but you can also increasingly bring in young companies that may be focused very specifically on an individual challenge or opportunity or just component of the industry that you're looking to get smarter on. And that expertise, and often that unaffiliated expertise, more maybe objective, right, is now available in a way that it wasn't a few years ago. And it's especially available when we start talking about topics that converge with emerging technology, because that's where the majority of these startups are going to be found. In that, and not on the screen, but if I may, Joe Tall scared the hell out of us earlier by talking about RoboCop a lot, and also Terminator. And there is this tendency, I think, to shrink back from this topic a little bit. It does feel a little overwhelming. It feels opaque. It feels undefined. And it's easy to default to this as a topic that, on the threat to opportunity continuum, like really just leans by default toward threat. I can tell you personally, there's also a lot of opportunity here to have better systems and processes to make your offices more efficient, to be able to do more with what you currently have, because we all know you're probably not going to get additional resources. Like, that's the tragedy to me of how sports betting was rolled out in the US, is the absence of those resources. But I'll offer up a company like Kindbridge. We're not investors. Anyone in here familiar with Kindbridge? So only a couple of people. Here you have a startup that is blending experience with healthcare and counseling and traditional RG practices with some leading edge technology about how to identify and then move people into that funnel of care. A company that we are an investor in, Connectify, they bring AI and ML to bear on AML and reducing the number of false positives that you generate when you're flipping through your SARS or whatever it's called in your particular state. And then ProhiBet is another example. So there really are, and I think we don't talk about it enough, there are opportunities for the good. And not just for the good of, is this a better product for consumers or more profitable for a sportsbook, but from the actual execution of your work you're doing with regulators. There's a lot of tech focused very specifically on optimizing, on systematizing, automating in a way that frees you up to have more time, energy, and resources to start to pursue some of the thornier questions around, okay, how is this being used by operators? What does that mean? What standards do we need to apply? Like right now, since I typically get, it's like, let me keep my head above water, right? So there are opportunities to move the water line down to torso and have an opportunity to then start tackling some of these thornier questions. That, I think, is an important part of that education component. Yep. Not just how can we deal with the threat, what's the threat look like, et cetera, but hosting folks in your offices or more events like this one that really bring together people who are executing in the space right now, not people like me who are just blah, blah, blah talking about it, but people who are actually executing with technology in this space in applied, licensed, regulated settings. And there are a lot of them out there. And that to me is a cause for enthusiasm and optimism. As good of a movie as RoboCop is, I think Joe does need to update his references. Where are you, Joe? Just slightly. Bring him into the 90s or the aughts.
Yeah. Well, again, not to harp on the threat factor, because I'm under Joe's umbrella, but what are the potential risks? Because we're always hearing about risks with AI. We kind of talked about it earlier. In all of us, we're talking about. There's a different scale, right? You've got, sharps and things like that. But as sports betting, mobile sports betting continues to grow, right? There's a lot of new bettors that are coming into the industry that may not understand it or know any better, and they're logging on for the first time in your markets. And they're saying, I'm a fan of the Sixers. And I'll talk about my roots because I'm from Philly originally. But hey, I'm a fan of the Sixers. I want to go on and bet on this app. I want to take the Sixers to win. And as soon as I log on, there's a whole bunch of different odds that are showing up on Joel Embiid's over in points and assists and rebounds. And hey, all three of them together, I can win $675 because I see the plus 675 and I get super excited and I make that wager. So is there risk in that? Because the artificial intelligence that the operators are executing know everything about Chris and Rufus and Matt and Doug as they pretend we're first-time bettors. They log on for the first time, and these come up, and your eyes get wide, and you get kind of excited. So are there risks there, and what's the responsibility?
Well, I think there are risks in a lot of these like high-hold products, both from problem gambling, but also, if you have somebody new that loses really quickly, and this is supposed to be entertainment, they're not going to want to keep playing. What you want is people to lose slowly and to feel like they have a chance to win. And so I think it's tough with some of these products, though, because they have to have a high hold because there are vulnerabilities. Like AI machine learning models for same-game parlays are never going to be able to capture absolutely everything. There's exceptions to every rule, and there's people like me that are trying to find these exceptions and make a lot of money off of them. And so I do think that we need to be cognizant, or operators need to be cognizant of I guess, they need to be thinking more long-term in terms of profitability of a particular player. And so, you want them to stick around long enough, and if you take their money too quickly, that's not good. And so the question is, I think to be able to do that, though, you need better pricing. I think that's the key. And right now, there hasn't been a ton of investment by operators relative to other things in better pricing.
This is where we get the big reveal that Rufus is AI, right? Is that, or did I jump the gun?
Is he real?
Yeah. Yeah, that was I do think in your comment, so I'll disagree slightly. It's probably one of 4 times in my life that I'll ever disagree with you. I don't know that all consumers want the experience that you described. I think of losing slowly.
Well,
I think some consumers are fine with just gambling, lottery ticket, and they're okay with it. And I think we should be careful about assuming that consumers are monolithic or that we know what consumers want, because from there can start to spring some negative policy or policy that may have unintended consequences. I don't want to step on your response, but I will. Whenever people say that, they're about to do the thing that they said they don't want to do. I didn't mean to interrupt you,
no
but
offense, but
that is exactly what I'm doing. The thing that I get most concerned about, to answer the question directly, is creating the sports betting equivalent of, or the gambling equivalent of, just insanely processed food, where it overwhelms your ability to act rationally, where it is hitting something in the lizard brain, and it is so advanced that you don't even know why you ate all the chips. You just know you ate all the chips, and you don't even feel good about eating all the chips, but you'll do it again. But I don't think we get to know what that looks like until we have the structure.
Well, there was a lot of chips eaters. I know that because you got a lot of chocolates.
I've never seen a cookie tray just absolutely decimated as quickly. And I was I used the reach and went over the top of someone, literally. I was going to get that cookie. But I don't think we get to see that impact. We're guessing at that impact until we have a better understanding of what are operators doing, how are consumers responding, and what does the data tell us. And I get that can feel like a brush-off answer, but otherwise I get worried that we're just guessing. And we look at something and we say, that looks bad, but we don't actually know if it is bad. It might feel bad to us, or we may perceive what a consumer wants and think that it feels bad through that lens. But I don't know that that's where we make policy from.
I also think there's an entitlement component to the sports books. And because I've talked to odds makers / traders who've had meetings with the suits, whether it be monthly, whatever, and everything's fine after the meeting, but the people who own the sports book, and they're like, how did we lose this month? They're like, well, yeah, I mean, bettors can't lose every single day. But there's such a assumption that they're just running a lottery where they're going to guarantee themselves X amount of percent, but the hold percentage is an average. And people are allowed to win week 4, 11, 15 of the NFL season. And they'll lose the other weeks, or whatever, the masses, the recreational bettors and things like that. But so I do think there's a sort of like inner and subconscious entitlement that they just feel like they're supposed to win, so they should win. And when they're not getting it, they're dumbfounded. So maybe that's why they're more inclined to be predatory and things along those lines, because they have overhead to meet and they're supposed to win because they spent all this money on the licensing and then the advertising with league, NFL. I mean, they spent all this money because this is just like a residual investment fund.
And it's a good point. Actually, I can call out some of my colleagues who, when we do training with some of the regulatory agencies, one of the things that Matt Toller brings up, and Torsten Toms will always say, sports books can lose money. And it's to the point that you make, that they come in kind of, with the notion that, we're going to win all the time.
Right, and I've used this example, like, when I was a kid, we were taught drugs are bad, and it's like the Nancy Reagan, this is your brain on drugs. There was something like that for betting. I don't know what it is other than the house always wins. So, like, they don't always win, right? Some people win.
Are you saying drugs are good, actually?
Yeah, some people win long term, but there's such a barrier. Like, I dealt with it on the content side for, news producers or whatever. They were so programmed that no one wins betting. And like, they didn't understand the process and the connecting of the dots, how there are, now it's long-term, less than 1%, depending on who you talk to. But going back to the entire, over time, like, the losers are going to go away because they have no money, right? So the people who win a little bit may come back because they have good income and steady income or whatever, but at some point the well runs dry to a certain extent to the donators, and then there's the bettors who are up and down, and I think people need to get comfortable, people meaning the sports books, need to get comfortable with like lower hold percentages. For example, the hold percentage in Nevada is much lower than the hold percentage in other states that are newer, right? Have newer, more recreational bettors, more novice bettors, whereas the hold percentage is lower. In Nevada, it's around, 5%, 4.5%?
But I think that's based on products.
Yeah.
Like the SGPs are really high hold products. Like parlays are high hold products in general, but it's kind of deceptive because it's compounding, right?
Maybe that's what it is.
If every leg of a 8-leg parlay has a 5% hold, you can do the math on that for me. It's 40% edge or something like that, right? 40% hold percentage, something like that. But in reality, it's still 5. It should be. It is effectively a 5% hold percentage. It's just if the person wins the bet, then they would put it all on the second one. If they win that leg, they put it all on the third, right? I mean, that's
recreational bettors who win are more likely to keep it in the ecosystem. So if they lose Sunday night or win Sunday Night Football, they're going to bet Monday.
I'm just saying parlays though are actually. I mean, they're.
I don't think it's just that.
Kind of
so maybe this is just my being clueless, but all I'll say, you may not fully understand just because of the hey, like you don't interact with like the most recreational bettors.
No.
I'm amazed, whether it be social media or just hearing interviews and stuff, just like how elementary the recreational bettors are that are in other states and things like that. And look, I'm mid-40s and a bachelor, and I bet all day and things like that. So I'm not interacting, but I've seen comments that I'm like, oh my God, like they are kindergarten compared to this stuff.
Doug, I had somebody on Twitter ask like ask if I would ever just put out like a golf play that I bet, and I said, well, you know, if I bet at minus 120, you know, it's going to be like minus 135 now. I wouldn't put that out because there's no value. And the person said that, well, no, I just want to be on the same side as you, you know? I'm like, you're going to lose money doing that. It's the same thing with the whole idea of bet percentages, and people say, oh, I want to be rooting for the same thing as the sports book. But the sportsbook doesn't make money because they have like lopsided action and they know which side's correct. They make money because they get plus 110. And if you're tailing the sportsbook and you're taking minus 110 instead of plus 110, you're not going to win.
I think it's okay. I think it's okay that people lose. It's gambling, right? Like I think again and I know we're off track here, so I'll keep it brief. I just want to reiterate that point that if we work backward of trying to solve for what we think is an optimal outcome for the customer at large, that's a very tough place to make policy from. An individual book can make their like corporate approach and commercial strategy from that point. You can make that decision, and that can be the voice that you take from your media platform, right? And the customers you want to speak to. But I think it is dangerous when, dangerous is too strong a word. That's not the foundation I want to build policy on, because it feels difficult, at least at this point, to get that right.
What about just transparency? What if, like, I mean, is it a really bad idea for a customer to be able to know what the hold they're betting into is?
No, I don't think there's an issue with transparency.
I mean, I think when you have one-sided markets where you can bet something at yes at 90 to 1 and you can't, there's no to price. Like, it's like, will Tiger Woods make a hole in one in the Masters? Like, the odds of that are like 1,000 to 1 or actually way higher than that. And you can see, okay, I can bet at 30 to 1, but I can't bet against it, right? I mean, so I think that if you're steering people towards things where, you know, you're going to win as an operator, you're going to win at an exorbitant rate, like, I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't be able to offer those products, but I think that the consumer should be more educated and know that they're betting into a higher hold market.
Don't they already know that? I mean, like, you can walk into a store and only buy something. But built into that, not to be totally protective, but built into that is their overhead and all this other stuff that gives them that edge on that 30 to 1 prop offering, right? Like, they've spent money to be able to offer that.
Right, they've spent money to be able to offer anything.
Right. So, I mean, are you saying there should be just a 1 to 50 instead of not a 1 to 30?
And you want the calorie count.
Yes,
you want the calorie count on the menu.
Yeah, basically, I think, right. That's basically what I want. That's a great analogy.
And we could probably go on and on and on for another 2 hours and 3 hours about this subject, right? But obviously, you know, we're running out of time, and you know, this has been really informative, you know, and I can sit here and listen to you guys just go on and just hear the knowledge that you've shared with us, and I appreciate it myself, you know, from esteemed colleagues like yourself that are embedded in this industry and know the ins and outs. And it was interesting hearing from, you know, Rufus, who's a professional sports bettor, and hearing his side, again, because you know, there's two sides of sports betting. You know, there's the regulatory component, which we're all interested in, but it's also interesting hearing from Doug and Rufus, hearing their perspective, so you get a different, you know, because we're always hearing from our side, you know, the regulatory side. So to me, this was really interesting, and I appreciate, you know, and then Matt, you wearing your regulatory hat. And we'll have to get Chris a regulatory hat somehow, some way. Maybe Tall Joe.
Getting him one for.
We got bulk order. From what I understand.
Yeah, and then all you guys. But again, I truly, genuinely appreciate the time and informing myself, not only myself, but probably on behalf of our audience here today. So. Again, if you have any questions, we're out of time, but you can tackle them or stop them over here in the, sorry. You can try to grab the guys as they leave here if you have further questions. I've invited them to the reception, so maybe you can ask them questions there as well. So again, appreciate the time, and thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.